talking this afternoon with Mr. Nicholas Marrone of Johns Island, South Carolina. The interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Now, Mr. Marrone, can you begin by giving us some background on yourself? Where were you born? Where did you grow up? That kind of thing.
My background is, and it started in Italy. I was born in Italy in a little town called Fragnette, which is a suburb of Benevento, which is a city of Naples.
Mm-hmm.
And I was 5.5 years old when I was brought into the United States. I was a naturalized citizen.
Mm-hmm.
And being naturalized, of course, we were just the old immigrants. We
Mm-hmm.
were plenty of us coming in, very Italian.
All right.
I grew up in an ethnic neighborhood in the Bronx, New York.
All right. Now, when did you arrive in the States?
1929, the Great
Right.
Depression. Boy, we had it great.
Yeah. Now, why did your family move over to the States?
Why does any family move from their point of origin? It's either from either religious or financial reason. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, financial.
Mm-hmm.
Dad wanted a better job.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted to go to the place that had all the opportunities,
Right.
and America was the place.
Okay.
Now, my dad had been here long before I got here.
Okay.
Had worked
Mm-hmm.
long enough to make enough money
Mm-hmm.
to get my mother and I, who were in Italy,
Mm-hmm.
be transported over.
All right.
And you've heard the story about Italians being WOPs. W-O-P, WOP meant without paper.
Mm-hmm.
So we were naturalized, so we had papers.
Mm-hmm.
People that were WOPs were ones that didn't have any naturalization, so they sent them right back, I gather. I didn't know, but this is what I think they did.
Well, by then there were some pretty tight regulations on immigration. After 1920, there was,
I'm sure there were.
So, in that sense, you're probably fortunate. Now, what kind of work was your father doing?
Well, my dad couldn't get in under the normal allowances that they had at the time, so he said, well, I think I can do this. I can go into Canada, which would let a lot more immigrants in a lot more freely, and then work my way backwards into the U.S. by way of Minnesota and back into New York. That's what he did. It was easy for him to gain entry from Canada than when it would have been coming from Italy because of the way they rated the immigrants.
Right, right.
And ever since then, here we are. I went to parochial schools, which I'm forever grateful. We had plenty of history. In fact, we had to enact history like the Lincoln-Douglas debate. You were Lincoln, I was Douglas, and we had to change. And when we played salesman in high school, you were the buyer, I was the seller. But we don't seem to have those kind of roles anymore. We go through schools. I've had 7 boys, and they all did well. But history is something that was a little lacking. It was like, in fact, my kids didn't get excited about knowing what I did during the war until they were maybe 20. It was like, well, where were you fellas all this time? Well, gee whiz, we never had it. They were in the Kent State ruckus that we had back in
1970, yeah.
Yeah, and at that time I had 2, 3 in college, and I says, you fellas get right back to school. I'm paying tuition. We lived about 10 miles from the university, Kent State, and I found them at home one day, and I said, you fellas get on back. He says, well, Dad, I said, I don't want to hear it, get on back. By that time, it spread over the airwaves that the Kent State riots had begun, and somebody got killed, and I said, by God, you fellas do have some brains after all, you know. And,
All right. Let's kind of steer us back here, back into the 20s here, and I'd ask, what did your father do for a living at that point?
my dad was a mechanic, an automobile mechanic, worked for the Parmalee cab system in New York City, and worked there till retirement.
All right. Yeah, that's the kind of job that you'd probably manage to keep through the Depression. A lot of
They
other
were
guys.
good, because Dad used to say, if you get a city job, you've got it made, you get paid no matter whether you work or not. And I'm saying, well, and we trained for a lot of jobs that we never wanted. We trained for the police. You had to run a 7-mile, a mile in 7 minutes, and you go through all that training. You get a job with the sanitation department, you had to be somebody. You had to have strength, stamina, and it was very competitive. A lot of people wanted that city job. That was security. When you had a city job, it was secure.
Okay.
Then,
no, you mentioned you went to parochial schools. Did you finish high school?
oh yes,
All right. And what did you do when you finished high school?
finished high school, Pearl Harbor,
Mm-hmm.
whammo. I had gotten I was destined to go to Fordham, which was Fordham University in New York, on a scholarship. But then the war started, and half the neighborhood went, and that neighborhood's going, I'm going with them. Everybody went. There was a lot of allegiance in my time.
Right.
Somebody kicked us, we wanted to kick them back.
That's right.
Allegiance now is a little lacking.
Very.
We have enough of it.
Now, you'd mentioned before the interview that you were officially drafted, or did you get a draft notice and then go and enlist, or what?
Yes,
what
no,
happened?
we got a draft notice and said, as of December 31st, you are now, you're a property of the U.S. government. You're to report to Long Island. I forget the place we had to report to, and then you were conscripted and you're in the military.
All right.
They put me in the infantry. And I said, infantry, what is that? Well, you'll find out. After going through basics in Alabama, which was I went Camp Upton at first, and from Camp Upton we went to Alabama, and we went to Fort McClellan, which we got our basic training.
All right. Describe the basic training experience down there.
It was wonderful. It was exciting. It was vigorous. It was not entertaining, but it was helpful. And it was all knowledge. And if ever you want to learn, there's no one that can ever stop you from learning. If you want to learn,
Right.
if you don't want to learn, it doesn't matter.
Now, normally, there's a lot of emphasis on physical training and learning to obey orders and that kind of thing.
Physical is right.
Were you
It's all physical.
Were you in good shape when you got down there?
I'm in good shape. I wish I was that way again. But well, we'd gotten through the basics, and of course, after basics, they sent us out to different camps. We went to Camp Upton, not Camp Upton, A.P. Hill, which was in Virginia,
Right.
Fredericksburg, and from there we went to another camp, and then we read a circular that says, we want you in the Air Force. And I said, gee whiz, I wonder how you get into the Air Force. I went to see my CO, who was he had some soft spots concerning Air Force because he didn't make it because he had a bad eyesight. He had an eye that he had put out one time and he couldn't make it in
Right.
And he says, we have trained you to be what we think is going to be the best, and you want to go into the Air Force? Yes, sir. Well,
How far did you get through infantry training? Have you done sort of specialized training, or?
Went to infantry training and went to the different camps there for a while, and of course, what they're doing then, they're researching areas that need certain talents. I had a mechanical background. I had a good chemistry background and whatnot, and I had machine experience, having worked for the National Biscuit Company. And I was a machine captain, and I can regulate gas valves and watches and have band ovens running a certain speed. And at my age, that was quite a tribute.
Right.
And of course, I was making $1.07 an hour then. Boy, that was big money. When everybody was making 90 cents, I'm making $1.07.
Yep.
Boy, I'm big stuff, you know. And of course, that goes on your record. And they said, do you have any mechanical experience? I said, well, yeah, I can take anything apart and put it together. You made Air Force.
Right.
And I did. And they sent me to Lincoln, Nebraska. There we trained on aircraft, P-39s, P-40s, P-47s. We didn't have 38s then. And I said, well, gee whiz, now why am I being sent to a place that has this type of aircraft? He says, because those are basics. If you can understand inline engines, we'll put you where you'll understand radial engines, and if you can do this, well, you'll put it here. And I'm saying, gee whiz, boy, this is knowledge. Boy, I love it. How do you do this, that, and the other thing? And they teach you how to read technical orders, which were masterful, because in order to find out what that aircraft needed, you had to go to a certain spec, get the book that had the knowledge pertaining to that specially, and then you'll have a breakdown of everything you had to do. 101. You take this apart, that apart, that apart, and you put them back together the same way you took them apart. Well, that was the training. Training from mechanics. Like I said, that was
And about how much time did that course take?
It didn't take, I don't think we were, let's see, that was, I think 2 months. 2 months. If you didn't make it in 2 months, you were not worth keeping, I guess. But we were all keepers. We were pretty good.
Okay. And then where'd you go after that?
Salt Lake City. We went to Salt Lake City. And from there, we went to a POE in Antioch, California, and we were sent out to the different areas of wherever the military thought they needed us. And I ended up in New Caledonia. I said, gee whiz, where is this place? New Caledonia.
Now, how did they get you to New Caledonia?
By ship.
Okay. What kind of ship were you on?
Liberty,
All right.
Kaiser ships.
And was it sailing in a convoy or by itself?
Oh, it was in the convoy, but there were many ships, so, you know, and of course they didn't all go to the same place. Eventually they dispersed, but we stood alert every morning, 4 o'clock for submarine alert, and we made that through. And of course, at 18, nothing seemed to be that important. You know, you get up, you smoked, you went back to bed, you ate good, you met, you talked to people, you gambled, and it was life.
Did the convoy have any actual scares with submarines or anything like that?
No, not that I knew of. No, if they did, we didn't know that.
Okay.
They had their courses were always
Always zigzagging.
and we got to New Caledonia. I said, where in the heck is that new place at? He said, well, it's a place in the South Pacific. I said, oh, gee, how nice. Where is it near? Well, you're near Australia, you're in the Solomon Islands, you have Guadalcanal. And I said, Guadalcanal, I'd heard about that place. 42, they were taking one hell of a beating.
Yep.
Well, we got to the canal and it was pathetic. It was bad. We had the 1st and 3rd Infantry. We had the
1st and 3rd Marines, probably.
Marines.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I said
Yeah.
1st and 3rd Marines. And we had the Marines had they had F4Us at the time, and they were one heck of an aircraft. And we had those P-39s that were worthless, but you know, it's all they gave us, and they weren't worth shooting. But it wasn't too long, and after that we had 40s. And after we got knowledgeable with the 40s, the 38 came out. So we said, wow, what in the heck is this thing?
Do you know when it was that you arrived on Guadalcanal?
In March 43.
Okay.
March 43, right.
All right. So I'm kind of going back here to your service days to have done. So, about how much time did you spend in training then before you got over there?
From well, I spent 2, 4, total about 6 months since I gotten into the service.
Okay. Because
And,
that should take you kind of into the middle of 43 by then, if it's 6 months.
Well, it wasn't the middle. It was just about March, because when we got into Noumea, it was February or March, close in there, February or March. And then they sent us out to Canal. I said, Canal, what are we doing in the Canal? He said, well, that's where the new 13th Air Force is being assembled. I said, oh, 13? That's a lucky number, isn't it? 13, yeah. Well, anyway, it was just another number.
Okay. But tell me a little bit more about Guadalcanal itself, the physical conditions there. You said it was kind of a dump or not.
It was a time when the Japanese had the upper hand, and of course we were getting hit every night, every day. The Navy was doing a good job, but they were just as bad off as we were. They didn't have enough of whatever they needed, and we had a big pit there full of downed aircraft and battleships, and they called that lake
Iron Bottom Sound was what they called it.
Oh yeah, Iron
Channel,
Lake, we call it. And man, all right. Anyway.
But by the time you got there, that stage of it was pretty much done. Most of the Japanese were off the island, but bombers were still coming in. And would naval ships still come in and bombard you?
Yeah, they were bombarded. They were hitting us every day. They wanted to get us off the island because they owned the island before we got there. We made the invasion, the Marines did.
Right.
And of course they secured it, but on the other end, that wasn't secured.
Yeah, yeah, it's a
We had
big island.
Japanese down here, and
Right.
we're over here in Cactus 1 and 2, and we're saying, how secure are we? Said, don't worry about it. They're way over in the other
Yeah,
island.
yeah.
How big is the island? So don't worry about it. They're way over, and everything was way over until they blasted you. And of course, getting used to temperature, smell, rain, mud, mosquitoes. It's not New York City anymore, you know. Neither was it the States.
Now, were guys getting sick with tropical diseases?
Malaria, mostly. Malaria was the big thing.
Now, were they giving you atabrine? Were they giving you stuff to control that? Or
Yeah, they would mention that atabrine. That's that stuff they put in a blister bag, and you had to take a hot water can of water with atabrine. Atabrine prevented you from getting malaria,
right.
supposedly. But tonic, I believe, was a lot better. If we had tonic water like we have now, we would never gotten the malaria. I never got any of the diseases. The only thing I ever had was jungle rot. Got into my webs, my feet, my ears, nose, underarms, and boy, it's pathetic. And they painted you, at that time they painted you with this purple passion. We used to call it purple passion. No matter what it was, they paint you with this purple stuff, and you're purple all over. Well, anyway, I had gotten rid of that. And 25 years later, I got it another time. And I had every doctor in Ohio trying to get me cleared. They couldn't do it. They sent me to Cleveland Clinic one time. A little girl come out and says, oh, sit down. She says, I'll take care of you. I said, yeah, I bet you could. No one else could. She says, have a seat. Yes, ma'am. She came out and painted me up. I said, what is that stuff? She says, it'll help. I said, well, what is it? She says, well, it's a form of vinegar. I said, vinegar? They've tried all these bombs and whatnot. And she says, it'll work. And believe it or not, it did. I could never forget it. Cleveland Clinic. And I said, God, that girl knew what she was doing. I believe they called it salicylic acid, which is a form of vinegar. All right, so enough of that.
Okay, so you're on Guadalcanal. How long did you actually stay on Guadalcanal?
43, the end of March, April. That was the attack. We left April 18th, and squadrons got together, made the kill on Bougainville, came back, and we moved from there, went to Mordechai.
Okay.
No, Sandsport.
All right. Well, talk a little bit about now. What missions were the squad? So you were at this point with 12th Fighter Squadron.
12th Fighter Squadron. I was a crew chief then.
All right. So you were assigned a specific plane, and that was the one you took care of, and so forth. Okay. And what kinds of missions was the squadron flying while you were on Guadalcanal?
They were flying mostly strafing missions, and they were flying cover for the bomber outfits, which was, I don't know what the bombers were, but they're here now. And all we knew is we had to have so many aircraft on the line. Of course, by that time, I'm a corporal, and it wasn't too long after that, I'm a sergeant. I'm saying, gee whiz, man, this, if you had any rank, you were important. You knew something. So with everything you learned, you got an advance in rank.
Right.
And I had gotten to crew P-38-208, which was Cutie Connie. And it was one of the ones that went on the raid, too. And after that, the CO, Colonel Bill Harris, who is still alive, by the way, and we still communicate, he said, anybody that knows anything about radial engines? I said, well, gee whiz, I was trained on radials, and they put me in an inline outfit. He says, well, don't worry, we need you. What do you need me for? These are all inlines.
Right.
Well, what do we do with a radial engine? Well, you go to BIAC and pick me up a C-47 and get it rigged, and we'll have a Fat Cat. What's a Fat Cat? Just get it. Yes, sir. So I and two other boys, Bill Schlosser and I and Ronald, went out to BIAC, and we took a C-47, and we said, gee, that looks pretty good. Doesn't look like it had much time on it. Looked like it had been run down a bit. I said, well, we can patch it up pretty good. So we rigged it, and I'll never forget. I rigged the elevator end, and Schlosser was on the front end. He came to help me rig the elevator trim tabs. Well, once you know, I rigged one bell crank up, he rigged one bell crank down. So when we flew to trim it, we would yaw, we would go one way and the other way. And I said, what the hell did you guys do? We went back, looked it over, we said, oh man, Bill. He said, well, I don't know whether you did mine. I said, I don't know what I did. All I know is I went up and you went down and we didn't talk about it. That's all. So we took the blame, squared it away, took off. And of course, after that, we used that aircraft to go everywhere. We took R&R, went to Australia with it. Tell you a little story about R&R. We had, anytime you go on R&R, someone wants something brought back. Guys want liquor, food. Mess sergeants want fresh vegetables. And we had a mess sergeant from the Bronx. He says, bring me back 2 crates of tomatoes, which we did. Of course, not knowing what tomatoes did at altitude, we put them in, took them over, and when we go back to New Guinea, we had to go over the Owen Stanley Mountains to get in the New Guinea range.
Right.
And we were up maybe about 7,000 or 8,000 feet because they're only maybe 4,500. So we cleared them at about 8,000, not knowing that when you went up at altitude, these tomatoes burst.
Oh.
So we never knew about it. We got to Zanzibar, told them, Miss Sergeant, get your damn tomatoes off here. We brought them to you. You see, it stinks. A week later, he hadn't said a word about it. By that time, I thought, boy, he is unappreciative, indignant attitude. And finally, he says, when I said you guys to get damn tomatoes, don't bring me back ketchup. I said, well, what are you talking about? And he said, did you see those? I said, what do you mean see them? Well, they were real nice. He said, you want to look at them? And he had them, and they were all mashed over. I said, well, what happened to them? He says, I'm asking you guys. That's the way you brought them in. I said, no, we didn't. So we had to write whatever happens on an aircraft in 41B, a report. And that went a long way. And the colonel would say, what's this about tomatoes? That's a long story. But we were, well, never mind. He says, tell me about the tomatoes. Well, we did. He laughed. He says, well, he says, it might be that if we had pressurization, it wouldn't happen. I think, what's pressurization? Nothing was pressurized in those days. Right. At least not with our aircraft. And that was, well, it was something funny to talk about.
Let's go back to a little bit more serious topic. Your squadron, was that involved in the raid that took down Admiral Yamamoto?
It sure was.
And so what did you know about that at the time or learn about it?
Well, I didn't know about it except that we're going on a mission. Of course, you never know what the mission is until they're out so many miles out and they open up. So, man, we're going. But the navigator knew what it was, Major Kittle, and Mitchell knew what the moves were in order to avoid detection. They had to go certain courses, so many miles, and zigzag to get up in there so that their radar wouldn't pick them up. And they did that, and of course they were effective because they knew where he was going to be, and they had 3 Bettys out there. So one of them had to be the one that they had. So they shot them all down. But 2 of the people took credit for that, and that was an ongoing. Oh, that was an onslaught, but for 60 years it was the Lampier claimed, and Barber says, well, that's not the way it happened. Barber was Lampier's wingman. Whatever Lampier did, Barber knew he had to verify, and he says he couldn't have made the kill. If he was shot from behind and Lampier's coming from his starboard, he says, how the heck can you get a bullet in the back of it? Because at the end, they went down and examined the aircraft, and they found the bullet holes behind the general instead of on the side. And I hear lately that, as late as last year, they gave each of them half credit. But boy, that was ongoing. And Lampier was the general's, colonel's son. So, he had a little more power than...
Did that affect morale in the unit at all? Were there... It was just a personal fight between them. And
at that time, it didn't matter who did what. All we knew is we got them. Who did it, who got it. We didn't have cameras. Right. So it wasn't anything they flashed on the field. Later on, we had cameras. When everybody said that they made a kill, boy, it went on. They'd see that flutter. Boy, that was my kill, and you got credit for it. But with each year, we had more advanced aircraft. I remember when the P-38s came out and we had a wobble pump to get them primed so you can start an engine. And you primed it 5 shots, hit the key, turn the mags on, boom, boom, start up. Then they came out with a J that had an electric primer. And when you went out to pre-flight them in the morning, in the dark, getting ready for a flight, they said, all you had to do is hold that 5 seconds and you have all the fuel you need. Well, 5 seconds could be 5 years to some people, and you have a heavy finger, 1, 2, 3, that's not fast enough, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You have enough fuel, it floods. Then the compressor takes it in the back and the whole damn boom looks like it's on fire, and you're hoping that damn thing's going to turn over to put it out, and you say, oh my God, brand new airplane, and it finally catches. But you get used to gadgets, and this is the way we learn. We didn't have time to go to school and have orientation, take a flight. We had flights. We did fly in 38s, by the way. We had these piggybacks, take the radio out, take people up, saying, here's what happens when, oh, gee, I don't like that crap. So we were part of it. We were very much a part of it. My only disappointment was that after I knew enough to be concerned about what we did, that we weren't getting the attention that we needed. And, you know, it's like building a memorial 60 years after the war. Who needs a memorial? We already did the job. It wasn't something that we very highly regard as being great. And I haven't seen the memorial yet because each time I want to go, I either was in the hospital or I had some problem, couldn't go. But I understand now they have this memorial flight that some people are sponsoring. And they'll pay to take you there and bring you back, and I think that's real nice.
All right, let's go back in here to the story. Were there any other kind of particular events or things that happened on Guadalcanal that tend to stand out in your memory before we go on to New Guinea?
Ordinary things, well, you know, flights and missions were things that sometimes you wish you weren't there. Other times you wish that they'd happen to somebody else. But you know, for all that happened, I was always grateful. If I was late for a mission, that I didn't get there in time, someone come in with a dead load of bombs I couldn't release, crashed up and boom, blew up the whole half of the airport. You got to a revetment, you wanted to see what was going on, you were late, you didn't make it. Good, I'm glad, because when those things go off, everything goes boom. Those are, I would say, disappointments in one respect, but appreciated very much in another. I never really, well, I was frightened a lot, but I never worried that much. It's got to be, it's got to be.
All right. Now, you were mentioning kind of coming under attack and so forth. Was that kind of a nightly thing?
We had a Japanese, whatever they were close enough coming in from, I believe, Buna.
Yeah.
They called
them Buin, probably.
Yeah, they called them washing machine
Charlie.
Come across with these little potato bombs. They were about that big, but boy, they put enough holes in, but you had to ground aircraft. And a lot of holes. We had aircraft a lot of times that come in that were disabled. We had a 24 come in one time, and we had a bunch of 25s that were laying over for overnight because they jumped. They come in for fuel and jump, come in for fuel. We never had enough fuel to go and come back in one place. We had to have these little islands. And of course, the poor thing came in, and the wing was high enough and sheared like 20 tails.
Wow.
And I don't know where those 25s were from at the time, but they mustered all of us to get out there, and we each took a ship and put them together. Dope and fabric and patch and whatnot, skin, and put them off again. No big hell of a load. But
okay. Now, from there, did you go to Zanzibar, New Guinea next, or did you go somewhere else?
Zanzibar, New Guinea. Then from there, I went to Lingayen, which was in the Philippines.
Now, in Zanzibar, how was being there? Was that any different from being in Guadalcanal?
Oh yeah, a lot less agony because we would gain more territory. We had things under control. They just had the Battle of Leyte, which they just won and created the a lady had the submarine base, I believe. Navy had the submarine base, and of course, Navy was doing a lot of the work. They had all the armament. They were getting the bulk of the monies and effort that the forces needed, and the military came second. Navy ran the place.
Yeah. What kinds of missions were your guys flying out of those places, out of San Socorro, Morotai, or?
Well, the 38s were flying cover and strafing, a lot of strafing missions. Boy, they were strafing everything and anything. MacArthur's orders were to strafe and kill everything and forget who was behind you. Get the ones ahead, strafe them, get them ahead, and leave them behind. Why do we leave these people behind? I guess it was to starve them to death.
Yeah.
As long as we can strafe and kill all the barges. They used to float a lot of barges at night, and we learned to get them at night and shoot them all up. And we starved a lot of them.
Yeah, and actually, at the end of the war, you had some Japanese units that were stranded in these islands, and they'd actually settled down. They became farmers.
A lot of them still there, probably.
Yeah. But some of them just they started planting crops and just settling down and waiting for the war to end because they couldn't go anywhere, they couldn't do anything. And some of these islands, certainly New Guinea, they were big enough that you could do that.
And one of the things I resent about the European war effort and ours, and you always say, well, what those guys get all the. They had the 8th Air Force, man, they had everything. But yeah, they were losing like 10 aircraft a day or an hour. We weren't that bad. But when I hear that D-Day, June 6th,
44,
it was quite an effort. That was one invasion, right?
Yep.
Do you know how many we had?
There's probably a couple of dozen major ones and a lot of smaller ones, yeah.
20 that I knew of, and then we, just another invasion.
Yeah.
A few thousand people killed, another invasion. And the atrocities that the Japanese were responsible for were never made public enough to criticize. Why? I don't understood that.
Yeah. We had a few of them. You had the Bataan Death March and a couple other things, but most of them, but a lot of what they did in the places they took over is, we
You
didn't
don't
know
want
about.
to hear about half of what the hell they did. We would go out to rescue with a C-47. We'd go out to Tawi, Sango, and Borneo to pick up, and there's nobody there. Well, they had 8 pilots out there. What happened to them? Later on, you find out they burned them all, pitted, opened up a couple of tins of gasoline, put them down, fire them up, and burn them. The atrocities. Now, I never had pictures of that because I was always on the tail end, but there are people that, and we've seen some of those burning. You ever hear about it?
Well, not specifically of that, but certainly of killing prisoners and mistreating both prisoners and civilians in the places that they took over. A lot of fairly brutal stuff.
Those suckers even ordered parts of bodies that they thought they could eat. They didn't have enough food. And, I wasn't there. I didn't see that, but I hear about that, and I'm saying, holy mackerel.
All right. Now, we're going to go back here to your own story. You're moving around pretty regularly. You mentioned, I think, at some point, maybe off camera, that you felt like every place you went, you had to go build a new base.
It's just about it. It seemed like we were in the cities. Now, what are we aircraft people doing, building, we're putting down that Marston runway mat, locked up as like bottle caps upside down.
Yeah, so that's steel mesh kind of stuff?
It's slick as hell, but at least you could land on them. And some of them rolled up, some of them blew up. If one of them broke loose and you got it in one of the wheels, boy, you're gone. That wheel will just go crazy and blow up.
Well, aside from simply maintaining the aircraft themselves, what other kinds of duties did you have? What other sort of work did you find yourself doing?
Maintenance was all it is. There was nothing much more to do until we got to the Philippines, where we had more people, because in New Guinea, we had pygmy tribes and natives and whatnot, but there was nothing to go to spend, see, or really relish. And you get to Manila, and of course they had people. Then you start seeing different things. Then you heard from the Filipinos what the Japanese had done to them, for them, with them, and all the while, and say, well, they're gone now. That's all. Yeah. And they were nice people. They were very timid and apologetic and humble and did a lot. And mostly, what are we doing here, right? What the heck? When the heck are we going to leave? And the day they dropped the bomb, let's see, I was in Zamboanga. I was in Zamboanga then. And I was off. I wasn't flying that day. And one of my friends came in by the name of Mo DeMeo and Dominic Sia come in and say, "Hey, Marrone, the war's over." I said, "Get out of here." There was always a big, they just blew up so-and-so and caught somebody and the war's over. I said, "You fellas are full of you know what." They said, "No, they dropped this big egg and all of Japan is gone." I said, "Get out of here." Then we heard it through the grapevine that they dropped this big egg, and if they weren't going to settle, we're going to drop another one and another one. I said, "What is this thing they're dropping?" He said, "It's called an atomic something." "What's atomic?" I said, "Well, it's big." And here we are. Of course, after the war's over, we spent 3 months trying to get back. August, September, October, November. It was December before they got us on a ship to take us to Antioch, California, before they put us on a train. Now you fly the whole war and they put you on these pig boats. And
Right.
then the train had a wreck and had another problem and oh God. But then once you get out, I'm out. A lot of us stayed in.
Did they make any effort to get you to re-up or stay in?
Oh yeah, rank anything you want. I'm out. I am out. I didn't want to make a career of it. I had other things in mind, but
So what'd you do when you got back home then?
when I got back home, I went back to the biscuit company and I said, this is not for me. You've seen half of the world and how it lives, and I said, this is not for me. I went to the post office and they wanted radial engine, here again, they wanted radial engine instructors in Hawaii at Hickam Field, and I says, why would they want instructors at Hickam Field? Oh, God. They sent me to Wheeler Field first, and I was an instructor and there was no one to instruct. There was nobody there, and I said, this is the government.
Okay.
And while I was there, I heard that there was a Major Martin over in Hickam Field at the ATC, Air Transport Command. If you've got radial engine experience, they want you. I was saying, man, I keep hearing about this stuff. So I took a trip from Wheeler Field to Honolulu, which was where Hickam Field was, by the Navy base there, Fort Island. And I met the Major Martin, and he says, "Boy, we need people like you. We have a depot here, and we have people we have to instruct." And finally got to instruct some. So then I was responsible for line. I became a line chief, civilian line chief. And we brought in all kinds of aircraft. We brought in MacArthur and Truman. But that was a fiasco.
Right.
No comment. I don't want to talk about that. But it's. I didn't think generals and presidents would talk the way they did, but boy, they had something going on that I didn't understand. All I knew was like, wow. And then about that time, we were having the Vietnam thing was just cooking up.
Well, actually, the Korean War is.
Well, the Korean was just after that, but then they had Indochina, which was Saigon. Indochina was.
Yeah, well, the French were in Indochina in 1954, but the Americans were actually flying stuff over there even then.
We were flying over not Havocs, B-26.
Yeah, B-26 is what we were using.
And we were flying over A-20s, Havocs. And they were stopping in Honolulu, and of course the young pilots would say, "I got a bad engine." And I said, "Well, yeah, let's take it up and find out." We finally said, "There's nothing wrong with that. Let's get back, get it on the line, get it out of here." Because we were all trying to pull that.
Right.
And God love them. And all I can remember there is we were bringing in C-54s full of patients. SOP was when you had any patients, you stopped them on the runway, you called for military assistance, and you got the hospital people to get out. And I said, you know what, I've been there, I've seen these boys. I know what it is to be hurt. I said, let's wheel them into the hangar and find out what the hell's going on. I jack up the airplane with the patients in it, and boy, did I ever get, oh my God, man, I was on the carpet for that. That's not SOP.
Right.
You're taking a whole airplane. I said, well, would you rather they died?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what was wrong? There's nothing wrong. There was a clogged hydraulic line on a sequence valve, and the wheels will work and the doors will close. So what else is there? Get it off. Now, I can write it off as the crew chief to say that it's airworthy, but then the pilot had the right to reject it.
Mm-hmm.
Little things, you know, you let them go over your head and you say, gee whiz, people are dying. To get them out of here. They got to go to the base hospital out in California. We didn't have base hospital in Hawaii at the time, but while I was there, though, we did build, the military, build Triplet General, which is the biggest VA hospital in the area. Still there.
Right. Now, how long did you spend out in Hawaii?
9 years. And best friends of mine were Japanese, do you believe that? But they were Niseis.
Right.
And I had a couple of captain friends of mine that were really the nicest people. And I used to say, boy, you're lucky you didn't get sent down to where we were. We would probably shot you in two. He says, we knew that. That's why we went to Italy. And they were the most highly decorated battalion in the history of the military.
Yeah, I've interviewed one of them.
You did?
Yeah. He was with their artillery battalion, but yeah.
Oh man, those go for broke boys, I tell you. And you know, in my day there on the line, I had Japanese, Koreans, Portuguese, Kanakas, Howleys, which are the white people. They were all my crews. Whenever they had a luncheon, they'd get up this big table. They'd open up all their different stuff, and they'd say, "Mr. Nick," he said, "Come on, come sit." And I'm saying, well, what do you have? So, oh, we got these preserved duck eggs. And I'm saying, where do you get them from? Preserved duck eggs they're matured in manure. And they're like 5 and 10 years old. And boy, the older they are, the better they are. And I'm saying, well, I'd rather have my eggs over the sunny side up. But it was a way of getting involved, because when you refuse food, food was a calling card for acceptance. And you shared food, you learned to like it, and of course after a while I got to learn all the foods. And while we're talking about the islands, you've heard of ukulele? Where do you think it started?
I would have thought some European sailors coming by with an undersized guitar, but
Yeah, but where do you think it was originated?
I don't know.
Guess.
Italy.
No. Most people would say Hawaii for the ukulele.
Yeah.
UK, uk, not UK, 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 not a YK. Ukuleles were brought in by the Portuguese.
Okay.
And the Portuguese people were prevalent in the Hawaiian Islands. They were some of the first ones there after Captain Cook. And they introduced the ukulele. Someday it'll make you $100. It'll be a...
There you go. Yeah, I did not know that.
Well, you know it now.
All right. So you're in Hawaii for 9 years. Where'd you go after that?
Here again, boy, I'll tell you, I do get around. We went, the Hawaiian Islands at the time had a RIF, a reduction in force, like they do when things are bad. They just, And of course, with military background, we had added incentives, added points. They put that along with your tenure in the service, and of course you were the last one to be eliminated. And I'd read where they wanted some radial engine mechanics in Willow Run in Michigan. I said, Willow Run, where the hell is that? Said, well, there's a fella out there by the name of Kaiser who's building a C-119, and they need mechanics, and they will give you housing. And I said, oh man, this is where to go. Boy, I can get housing and all. Got out there, Willow Run, and I looked at the building, and I says, this is housing? I said, no, we kept prisoners in better places than this. And he says, well, if you hang in long enough, we'll make it right. And I did meet Mr. Kaiser, by the way. I met him on a line one day on a C-119, and we were getting some ships ready for tests. You know, you build them, and you have to test out, wave them, send them out again. And by the way, the 119s had 4360s. We had a 119 with a 33 on them, but we had these with 4360s. 28 cylinders. Big guy.
Yeah.
Called a corn cob. And big, those suckers were way up there, I'll tell you. They were beautiful. And it wasn't too long after that they phased it out, and I said, "Where the hell am I going to go from here?" Well, they started building the Kaiser Frazer automobile.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that?
No.
No. Well, they made the first little car. It was so economical that it was pathetic.
Mm-hmm.
You open up the trunk and it was all metal. There was no cushioning, no backing, no insulation. And the Kaiser said, all you supervisors have to take a different car home every day. I said, well, I'll take one of these damn things home. My wife will throw me out. Mm-hmm. Sure enough, you had to do it. We took them home. My wife would say, where'd you get this piece of junk? I said, we're supposed to be inviting the public to look at the brand new lifesavers. And she said, who would drive a little tiny thing like that? Wasn't long after that, the German
Volkswagen.
WW on their own. They took over. Mm-hmm. But he was ahead of his time, wasn't he? Mm-hmm. He was ahead of his time. He would come down the line and say, I never knew who he was. He'd come over and he'd say, hi. He says, what's happening here today? I said, oh, we're just making a final inspection. This is ready to go on the line for a test flight. He says, and how long have you been here, and do you like it? And I say, well, what do you do? He said, oh, I just take the temperature. Mm-hmm. And I said, take the temperature. So after a while, I said, who's that little guy taking the temperature? What kind of temperature? He says, that's Mr. J. Kaiser. I said, the Kaiser? Mm-hmm. Holy mackerel. Holy guy, mm-hmm. You know. I'll be damned. So you meet a lot of people, and you never know, oh, the heck, who are these people? Infamous, huh?
Mm-hmm. All right. If you were to kind of look back over your service career, how do you think your time in the service wound up affecting you?
What do I think of my time in it?
Yeah.
I think it was grateful. I learned a lot. I contributed a lot. Mm-hmm. I enjoyed a lot of it because it was all the association we had with one another was tremendous. Mm-hmm. And we had a lot of respect for one another. And the mission was all one. Mm-hmm. Get there, do it, and get on out. Mm-hmm. That's it. And I don't know, we don't talk too much about what we did. Mm-hmm. We did it, we got done, that's mm-hmm. it. There are other echelons of military that seem to talk a lot about a lot of nothing, and I'm saying, why, shut up. I don't know how many you've interviewed as World War II people, but we try not to talk too much about it. It was done, it was just, in fact, up until late here, no one ever really did much about it, did they?
It's really been the last 20 years that historians have really used oral history. So anything written today about World War II is very different from the way it was a generation ago. And it's a lot richer because we know a lot more of the things that didn't make it in the official histories.
The camaraderie was hard to beat. Mm-hmm. I mean, especially Air Corps. Air Corps had a very high respect for people in unison. Mm-hmm. You're in one ship, you did one job, you mm-hmm. got one. We're all trying to get there, not one guy. Mm-hmm. Look at me, it's not look at me, look at us. Mm-hmm. Once you got in that cockpit, whether it was a fighter, whether it was a twin engine, of course, would be a lot better. By the way, anybody like to fly a twin screw? You always had one to get back on. Mm-hmm. You fly a single, boy, you're on, you're in. And that camaraderie exists even today. We still talk to one another. Mm-hmm. I'm still talking to my colonel.
Right.
With people out here now, we got generals, majors, non-coms, officers, all in one big pot.
Right.
And it's a funny thing. After you get up in age, everybody's the same. Mm-hmm. We're all one. And I'm proud of that. All right. I'll tell you something else I learned, though. As an immigrant, being naturalized under my dad's papers, I never knew that you had to become a citizen by your own volition mm-hmm. at an age 21. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm in the service at 18, 19, 20, And at times I used to say, you know, I'm in. The colonel said, don't worry about it. You're in the military. You're a citizen. Right. 25 years after, my wife said, let's go to Italy. I said, what do we want to go to Italy for? I said, well, I want you to see the place where you were born. And I mean, I still had relatives. So we went out to get our passports. Went up to Cleveland, Ohio, and a fellow said, sit over there. And I said, boy, that's a rude son of a gun. And I had my discharge papers and my rank and all. And I said, he said, sit over there. I said, wow, I tell you, this guy's getting to me. But, you know, discretion and valor. I said, well, maybe I better just listen. I did. And he said, I'm an immigrant. I said, what do you mean? I was in the service. He said, doesn't matter, get over there. He wouldn't give me a passport. Went home, talked to my congressman, and he says, don't worry about it, I will take care of it. And I said, well, that's fine. He said, no, don't do a thing, I'll take care of it. You go back there in a week's time and do the same thing you did the last time you were there, and everything will be under control. I didn't have congressman, so a senator, Ohio. So I went up there that time to get my passport. The guy says, sit down here, please. Same guy, please. He had paper. He had me to read, I don't know, I read everything he threw at me. And I signed everything he put on. I dotted every I, crossed every T, and he says, here, congratulations. Well, whatever he did well. Probably racked him up a bit and said, I think you ought to be a little more conscious about what you're doing. And here I am. But I enjoy it. I'm proud of it. I have 7 sons, and I've had some jarheads in my family now, Marines. And my oldest is 62. My youngest is 44. But they all did well. They do well. Of course, now they're looking like, hey, Dad. I said, just settle down. I've been through a depression. You don't know what a depression is. Settle down. Things will take a little longer than you'd like, but they will settle down. And I've been through 6 recessions, and they go down. I never knew they happened. I've been in the building business a lot, so, you know, they go up and down. You work till you get to the peak, and then you hope that by the time you get to the valley, you're going to peak again, because peaks and valleys. Sales are awfully trepidatious because they influence value here, and all of a sudden you say, where am I? My God, all my kids are in sales.
All right.
Okay.
Well, it makes for a good story, and you tell it well. So thanks for taking the time to come in and talk to me.
Well, I don't know if that was going to be anything worthwhile, but, you know, we all did a little bit of something that made someone else enjoy.
All right.
All right, sir. Gee, I've got a ball.